The wind dragged across the plains like a thief, carrying with it the sting of dust and the smell of emptiness. The town of Dry Creek sat crooked under the weight of its own silence, wooden buildings leaning, saloon doors swaying though no laughter came from inside. Folks said the place had been dying for years, but it wasn't until that night, when the woman staggered in barefoot, her baby bundled in rags pressed to her chest, that silence turned into something heavier, something that could crush a man's heart. She was nothing more than a shadow wrapped in hunger. Her face was cracked from sun and tears, her dress torn like it had been gnawed at by wolves. She held the baby high, like an offering, and her voice, hoarse, sharp, cut through the town square. "Take her, please. Bread. Just bread. I'll trade my baby for bread." The words bled into the air, shocking enough to freeze the poker game inside the saloon, to make a drunk drop his bottle, to draw every set of eyes to her trembling frame. No one moved at first. A woman begging was one thing. A woman begging with a baby was another. But a woman begging to trade her baby. That was something darker, something that made even hard men look at the ground. She swayed, clutching the child tighter, her lips cracked and bleeding. "I have nothing else. She'll die with me. Take her, feed her," she choked, and her knees buckled. That's when he appeared, the rancher. He stepped out from the shadows of the mercantile, a tall figure wrapped in a long coat the color of dust storms. His hat brim cut his face in half, leaving his eyes unreadable. Folks in Dry Creek didn't know much about him except his name, Ethan Cole, and that he kept to himself on a ranch miles outside of town. Some whispered he'd lost his family. Others said he'd never had one to lose. Either way, no one had seen him smile in years, maybe ever. He said nothing. The woman turned her head toward him, her eyes glassy but wild, desperate. "Please. Bread. Take her." She lifted the baby higher, arms trembling from weakness. He didn't reach for the child. Didn't flinch. Just stood there, silent as a tombstone, while the rest of the town fidgeted in the dark. The sheriff muttered, "Lady, you don't mean that." But she meant it. You could tell by the way her fingers loosened around the bundle, the way her voice cracked into madness. The rancher finally moved. Not fast, not slow, just steady. He walked to the woman, the sound of his boots on the boards louder than the rattle of the wind. He looked down at her, his shadow swallowing hers, and for a moment, everyone thought he'd turn away. That he'd leave her to crumble into the dirt. Instead, he reached. One arm for the baby. The other for the woman. He took both. No words. No bargain. Just action. And in a place like Dry Creek, silence spoke louder than sermons. By dawn, the story spread like wildfire. Ethan Cole, the man who never spoke more than a grunt, had carried a starving stranger and her baby back to his horse, lifted them onto his wagon, and rode out into the desert night. Some swore he'd lost his mind. Others said it was pity. But there was one truth everyone felt like a knife in their chest. Dry Creek had turned its back on her. The rancher hadn't. The ranch sat lonely against the horizon, fences sagging, barn doors hanging loose. Once, it must have been alive with cattle, laughter, the sound of a family. Now it was hollow. Ethan brought the woman inside, laid her on the only bed not covered in dust, and put the baby in a wooden crib that had sat empty for years. When she woke, her eyes darted around the room, half wild, half relieved. Where am I?" He didn't answer. She clutched the baby, who whimpered softly. Why did you take us?" His silence was heavy, but not cruel. He set bread and water on the table, then stepped back, letting her decide whether to trust him. Her hands shook as she fed herself, then pressed crumbs to the baby's lips. She cried while doing it, soft, broken sobs that filled the cracks in the walls. Finally, between tears, she whispered, "My name's Clara." He gave the faintest nod. Days bled into weeks. Clara recovered slowly, though her eyes stayed haunted. She worked around the ranch, cooking, mending, carrying her baby strapped to her back. Ethan would rise before dawn, tend the fields, fix the fences, ride the land until the sun went down. They barely spoke, but silence has a way of saying more than words. He watched her cradle the baby at night, rocking gently by the fire. He saw the way hunger had sharpened her bones, how fear had carved lines too deep for her years. She, in turn, watched him work until his hands bled, burying something invisible in the soil each day. One evening, Clara finally asked the question that had hung between them like smoke. "Why didn't you let me give her away?" Ethan's jaw clenched. His voice, when it came, was low, gravel scraping against stone. "'Cause no man has the right to take a child from her mother." Her eyes filled again. But she pressed, softly, "And why did you take me, too?" He stared into the fire, the flames reflecting in eyes that had seen too much loss. His answer was slower this time, almost broken. "Didn't seem right, leaving you behind. The weeks hardened into months. Clara's baby, little Anna, grew stronger, her cheeks round, her laughter echoing through the empty ranch house. That laughter pulled something out of Ethan, something buried under years of dust. He started fixing the crib properly, patching the roof above it so no rain would leak through. One night, Clara found him standing in the barn, staring at an old rocking horse covered in cobwebs. He brushed the dust off it without a word. She didn't ask whose it had been. She knew. The silence between them began to change. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full of things unspoken, of wounds that didn't need explaining. But the world outside their ranch wasn't as forgiving. Word had spread about the starving woman who'd tried to trade her baby. Word had twisted, sharpened. Men in town whispered that maybe she wasn't fit to raise a child. That maybe Ethan Cole had taken pity, but pity wasn't enough to raise a baby in a dying land. Then came the knock. 3 men on horseback. Lawmen from the county. They wanted to see the child. Clara froze, clutching Anna to her chest. Her knees buckled with terror. Ethan stepped forward, his tall frame filling the doorway. "She's not yours to take," he said, his voice steady as stone. The men exchanged glances. "Folks say she begged to sell the child." "That true?" Clara's sobs choked the room. Ethan's eyes burned. "Folks say a lot of things when they don't know hunger." The standoff stretched like a whip ready to crack. Finally, one of the men spat in the dirt. "You're a fool, Cole. Starving woman, sickly child. Won't end well." But they left. That night, Clara sat at the table, tears dripping onto her hands. I did say it. I was ready to give her away. I'll never forgive myself." Ethan looked at her, really looked, his silence breaking with words that cut clean. "You were starving. That ain't the same as not loving." Her sobs turned to shaking breaths. She reached across the table, her hand trembling, and for the first time, he didn't pull away. By spring, the ranch began to look alive again. Fields grew green, fences stood tall, laughter lived in the air. Clara no longer looked like a shadow. She looked like a woman reborn. And Ethan, though still quiet, walked with something lighter in his step, as if the ghosts of his past had loosened their grip. But the memory of that night in Dry Creek never left either of them. The night she begged to trade her baby for bread. The night the town turned its back. The night Ethan Cole said nothing, yet took both mother and child into his arms. And in that silence, 3 lives were saved.